Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Quick Fix. My name is Chris P, and I am joined by the one, the only Dr. Doug, the co-host of this goddamn show. What's up, Dr. Doug?
Oh, it's going all right. It's that Christmas season. Work is slow. COD's getting back into it. I'm just excited. I was an exciting week of games last week. I guess we'll start with that. How did you feel that actually, yeah, we'll start with what people are here for. How was your fantasy weekend first, and then we can talk about your Call of Duty allegiances.
Yes, my fantasy weekend was great. I took a couple tidbits from last week's show, so if you haven't listened to that, go listen to it. And it ended up playing in my favor. I caught myself betting
Interesting.
on majority of control games. I threw a couple hard points in there, as I was saying to you before we started recording. I ended up hitting on a couple of my first ones, so I started, tossing some money around, seeing how much I could build it into, which in retrospect probably wasn't the smartest thing to do, but I still ended up, finishing probably up, I would say, like two units, if you would, which was good. So I go into next week with, or this week rather, with some money in my pocket, but all in all, I did well when it came to that. Definitely some learnings from it, which we'll obviously get into. The game didn't really, some of the games didn't play like I expected them to, but
Yeah.
that's all part of week one. It's part of a new game. It was expected, but it is what it is. But you're the real guru behind this stuff. So how'd you get on?
Yeah, I was saying before I think I might have almost exactly broken even, and I think I lost everything the first day and won almost everything the second day in order to break even. And then after that, I sat back on the end of day two and I look back and I'm like, I mean, yeah, it's like a lot of the loss is just like bad reads on what the situation or like how the players were going to fit into the lineups. And then I just chose to sit out day three entirely. And I didn't. I mean, I was there. I was hovering, looking for spots all through the day, and I just never could pull the trigger on anything I felt good about. So yeah, I'm happy to come out of this weekend. Pretty even. And I think the interesting thing about week two now is just we're in this awkward spot now where before week one, we can sit here, we can sit on the podcast and pontificate about what we think the roles are going to be, if the game's going to be slow or fast. But now we've seen some games. We know a little bit about it. We know a little bit about people's roles. But at the same time, our sample size for any given player is like max 4 maps for hardpoint maybe and so like very little you can go off on that alone. So I think we're in this awkward, like, sort of uh stage where yeah, like I feel weird making a bet just based on, oh well, this guy he played a much more significantly faster role this weekend than last year. So like maybe PrizePicks has him a little low because his like career average is a bit lower. I feel weird pulling the trigger on a play like that, but then I also feel weird. Kenny is a really good example. He had an explosive first series, dropping 99 kills, which I know was like big at the time. And then the second series did nothing. Like had like 60 kills least on his team too. And it's like I'm looking back at last year going, Kenny was typically a guy with low engagements, but like I don't know. You're in this awkward spot where it's like, do I go like, man, he looked amazing in that one series, and yeah, he like played a much faster role too in that. Maybe it was just maps, maybe it was just the day, like maybe it was the opponent. Like I'm in this weird spot where it's like, yeah, you don't want to chase any of the edges. To me, I'm much happier to sit back and like, yeah, start to collect some data on like, okay, here are the maps where these players have specific roles. Here are the teams that like to play these maps, so I can watch out for. Like this might be more of a data gathering weekend than I'm going to put all my chips in the middle on, yeah, on Nero definitely going over because that guy plays faster than anyone I've ever seen. Because he might just come out this weekend in practice. They said, "Hey, man, slow down," and now he's a completely different player or something. So I'm not ready to draw conclusions quite yet.
Yeah, this weekend is going to be a weekend of bad beats. I would say in my
Yep.
head, there's a lot of false promises that might be out there right now. Just kind of, saying what you said a different way, where you are used to, or not used to. You saw how someone played opening weekend. You can't take that, as the Bible right now. A lot can happen, a lot can change. They could change their playstyle regardless if they won or not, right? Where it's like, think of like FaZe in Boston. Yeah, FaZe ended up winning, but the games were very close. So they
Totally.
might change the way they play. So you might not see a certain speed, or someone might play a certain role in the sense of like holding certain angles, or
Yeah.
doing the dirty work on certain maps. It's very tough to be able to determine what I'm going to do. At least I look at it in the way of like, and I don't know if anyone out there or you has ever dabbled in like day trading before, where if you see everything's going green and you're like, okay, it has to crash at some point. and you see one red candle, you can't go immediately there because you think it's going down. You have to confirm it by seeing a couple in a row and confirm that it's actually going down.
It's it's always the balance between, yeah, you want to obviously strike before the market knows what to adjust for a player changing their role, but you also don't want to be too early and wish that you had the, yeah, you had all this past data telling you, hey, this isn't how it's actually going to go. And it's always the balance with this sort of thing. I think it can be helpful to think about things from PrizePicks perspective, and we talked about that a lot last week with just like what can they do to set these lines. They're not in scrims, they don't know. Well, they're going to look back to last year's averages, and that can help us a little bit because if we feel we have an edge, just an informational edge, maybe we can take care of it. But yeah, now it's like you're looking at this information about the games, excuse me, and they are, and now you're like, we're just trying to say we can gather more from that than they can. That's a little bit of a tougher sell, I think. So
Yeah,
um,
I think it goes both ways, where like the books, if you would, Vegas, there's not information that they can really go off of now either. So we might see similar lines coming out or big adjustments coming out based on week one. So I would say personally, what I'll look for is, those crazy numbers based off of last week. That might be something where I dabble in unders on there because, sprinkle light, of course, I'm going to, but like maybe they're misinterpreting last week. Maybe they're not looking at it at the same lenses like you and I, where it's like last week's results are not this week's, results, or it might
yeah.
not be. So who knows? That's something I'll keep an eye out for. But all in all, this weekend gonna keep it light, but there's a lot of good matches. Call of Duty's back. It felt great to just sit down and watch it, be in that facility, see the guys. Things didn't go our way. We'll get to that point, but it is what it is. But
Yeah.
any other learnings you took from this weekend before we, move into what's coming up?
Well, quickly, you can still hear me, right?
Oh,
And you
you're
can see
muted.
I
Wait, or did my headphones die? Yep, my
um
headphones died. We're back.
oh, okay. Well, that was that both of us had tech. So you can see on the in the video that I went dark because my dog just came in here and knocked my entire second monitor over. But I'm still here on the other one. But he just was walking through and just got caught in the cords and then took himself out. But okay, we're back. Yeah, no, I was actually, yeah, I was curious to ask you your takeaways in general about the speed in hardpoint and in control as well. I'll go first in saying that like we talked a lot last week about like, yeah, it seemed like things were going to be slower, and yeah, I'll be honest that like in my head I was definitely feeling that way. I didn't have enough information to like, I didn't want to tout that it was definitely going to be slower, but I really felt like it was going to be a lot slower. And it was a bit slower, but I will say it felt like, at least from the scrims I'd seen compared to the games, these money hills teams are much more willing to rotate in the games than they are in scrims, where like you might give it another go even. And even then, I thought in scrims they looked like there were some really strong hills, and it just made it. It felt to me like a lot more games were close because of that. Like teams were, yeah, in scrims. I know you're not. It doesn't matter if you lose by 10 or lose by 1,000 or whatever in scrims, but in these games, it was like it felt like teams were playing so conservatively. They'd much rather win by 10 and be guaranteed the money hill in on terminal or whatever than they would in scrims. And like to me, that made the games feel longer in hardpoint. And then I think the big thing in control was I don't think the games go to round 5 more often. At least it didn't feel like it, but there certainly felt like there were way more kills in the rounds. Yeah, I mean, we saw some of those scores, that New York against LAG game where Skies had like 6,000 damage or 7,000 damage or whatever. Like it, you don't see control games like that very much. So it's interesting to see how the control pace has changed, or like the kills per round. But yeah, curious your thoughts as well.
I'm in a similar boat. I think with Hotpoint, I saw, and I'm not going to come off as a professional, right? But this is just kind of, looking back at, certain hills and certain setups. Everyone's still obviously ironing out their gameplay. And it was the first time on matches, first games of the season, rather. And there were a lot of opportunities for less kills that turned into more kills, if that makes any sense. With like, say, like Burger Hill on Terminal, you were seeing teams not get proper position when they were defending on it. Instead, they would just be around the corner, just watching that cross and allowing teams to come up. And in situations like that, they open themselves up for less engagements, but at the same time, the enemy team was smart enough to know don't just run across and get mowed down. So in situations like that, it slowed down. But for the most part, with Hardpoint, it definitely played a lot faster than I was expecting it to. Like you saw
Yeah.
Hook flying around with the full time SMG, just causing mayhem, and like he looks phenomenal with that SMG. But like just seeing the speed that he was able to play with, especially in a game that I thought was going to play a lot slower, it was very eye opening for me to see that. And then with Control, like you said, it seemed like there were so many more kills to these rounds, and like teams just weren't kind of like giving up on hills. They were just crashing the boards the whole time, or crashing the points rather. But I
Pushing the
didn't,
boards. Good,
yeah,
good hockey reference
yeah,
there. Yeah.
crashing the. You could play for
Well, you good
basketball too.
basketball
Yeah.
reference. Yeah.
They were finishing their checks.
Yeah.
But I was not expecting as many go the distance games or not blowouts. I would say I was expecting a lot of 3-0s, and we did not get many of those. Like that was a couple of my bad beats where I was expecting a blowout, and it went game five. So I that's a game mode I want to take a step back and look at, because those are going a lot longer than I expected. And maybe, that comes with the territory of learning the game and learning the proper way to play Control in this game. But I was very, very surprised when I would look down at my phone after doing something. I was like, okay, they're on round 4 right now. Did not expect this. Okay, now they're on round 5. I was just like, all right,
Yeah.
I'm going into this final round. I can't have, Skies get one more kill. I'm like, yeah, it's over. It's done.
Yeah.
Like, it's over.
Yeah, I,
But yeah.
I know that feeling this weekend. There was a lot of that where, yeah, it felt like, well, the game just got started and he's already got 17 kills or whatever. Like, how did, yeah, oh, now I'm screwed. Yeah, I did get that a lot this weekend.
That happened to me with Shotzi. I had him, I forget what the exact, it might have been like 26 and a half or something like that in their match against New York. And he ended up dropping like 35 or 36. I forget what it was. I was like, yeah, that happened so fast. Like, done. And that was one. I usually go with 2 legs. I don't usually, do too much. I like to play it somewhat safe when it comes to how many props I'm throwing in there. And I threw him in to complete a 3 leg, and he was the last person I need. And I just watched it, get
Yeah.
ripped out of my hands within a minute of the game. I was like, yeah, this is done.
That is one advantage of the two-leg parlay with both players in the same game on opposite teams is it's like a band-aid. You just rip it off quick. Like after the map is over, you won or you lost, and that's it. You don't have one win, then you're like, oh, okay, I got it. I had one last year, a 3-leg with it was like 2 COD, but PrizePicks was doing a deal on WNBA opening night, and I had like an over 6 points on like some all-star player. I don't watch WNBA, but I had like over 6. It was like a special, and then she didn't play, or like she played and then got taken out like 2 minutes into the game and went under. So I had this slip with 2 that I'd already hit in COD, and then I lose it on like a WNBA teaser. That was like the worst, yeah, the worst beat that I had all of last year. Just like I don't know, insult to injury if I just played it the way I normally would have. But I was like, oh, like they were offering it to me for free, like cool. What?
It
Yeah, six
hurts.
points.
It hurts. It's
Yeah,
like, it's like being down on a terrible day of Sunday football, and then you lay in a bed. You're like, this Korean basketball game looks juicy right now, and then you chase it and you lose that.
a
You're like,
good feeling about this one.
why am I betting on that in the first place? Like,
Yeah,
it is what it is. But it takes those to learn. I have in front of me that you have a little quiz for me. That's
yes.
what the streets are saying.
Yeah, so we would yeah, streets have been talking and they are correct as usual. Yeah, so we talked a little bit now about like how we felt that the modes played out relative to expectation. So I looked at there were 88 games or 88 maps, sorry, of not 88 maps, 88 plays between the maps 1, 2, and 3 for each mode. So the 8 players on each team for each of the maps 1, 2, and 3. And I looked at all the PrizePicks offerings. I went with the ones that they posted early in the day before maps for any of the 3 were. So like these were subject to change over the time. So don't take this as gospel. If you got in later, you could have gotten different totals than what I had recorded at the time. But I just looked at how many of them went over and under in each. So for example, in Hardpoint, there were 88 players that you could have played on map 1 hardpoint totals. How many of those 88 do you think went over versus under? Actually, the percentage is not the number. So if you could guess a percentage of those that went over, under, or pushed, although there were none that pushed in hardpoint, only in search. I don't think they offered any whole number totals in hardpoint this time around.
I have a number in my head. First number that popped in my head. 64% went over.
No, 36% went over in hardpoint.
Wow. Oh, see, that
Isn't
is so ass backwards from what I would have
Yep.
thought.
It's interesting because, yeah, I mean, there were certainly a lot of players going. It felt like there were players popping off and going over, and certainly I think some of the spots that felt like they made the most sense didn't end up panning out. And I will say, I think Sunday was a big day for the unders in hardpoint, where Friday was not. But yeah, I was also surprised by that. Hardpoint unders were significantly favored overall on the weekend. Uh, another thing, yeah, another caveat in that maybe is like a revisionist history a little bit, but like, yeah, these were using the lines before the maps were announced. And I will say, to PrizePicks credit, they adjusted the lines on the maps pretty quickly and pretty decisively. I don't think it was any secret that if it got sub base, the totals were going way up, and if it didn't get sub base, the totals went down. And so that makes it a little bit yeah, like, so we say that the unders hit a lot of the time. Well, 4 out of the 5 maps, they were moving the totals down once they found out that the map wasn't going to be sub base. And so that might be a little bit of, if you had gotten in after maps had been announced, it probably was closer to 50-50. But yeah, that was the one that was the most surprising to me, is that hardpoint unders ended up ruling the day this weekend, and not what I would have, actually, it was what I would have expected, but then I watched the games and I didn't think that that's how it went. So it was interesting.
That's
Um,
very interesting. Hold on, I have something quick for you. And if you don't want to share this information, totally fine. If you don't want Prize Picks to hear it, currently the pros are playing on a different patch than what exists in the game as you can play it right now, with improved spawns and different spawns. What do you think changes with numbers once that patch actually gets pushed through? Do you think anything is noted there?
like, I think Prize Picks is going to do anything about that?
Yeah.
I know they're not going to do anything about that. But I also think that sort of, I guess I'm always the cautious optimist or whatever. Like, I don't think, yeah, I guess I don't know how the spawn change will play out in the matches relative to scrims, because I got burned by that last week, thinking the scrim results were surely going to translate over well into the matches. But um, yeah, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on how the spawns have changed. I haven't been keeping up too much with it. I knew that they weren't playing on the new spawns this weekend, or like last weekend, but it's yeah, I don't know if you have more insight into how the spawns have changed things, but I will go on record and say I'm guarantee that PrizePicks won't do anything about the spawn, or like they're not considering that.
Yeah, I don't have a concrete info on it, but I do believe that they're a little bit more predictable than they have been up to this point. Like I know Karachi, the spawns like they're very difficult to read right now, like close to impossible. You don't have to block a specific zone; you have to block like an area. It's like it seems like it's a lot smaller now. So if I had to guess, it's something with improving the predictability of where people are actually going to spawn. But I don't have the exact answer for it. Maybe next week on the show I'll have some more
Yeah.
answers for you guys. I'll do some digging. I know some people.
Well, I mean, that's a spot for potential edge, where you have a listener who, yeah, thinks that they do have an idea of how that might impact the totals for these players. Like, I mean, yeah, that's a spot, because, yeah, as I said, I don't think that they're going to do anything about it. And so, like, if you have a strong conviction that that change will make a difference, then I think that's an interesting avenue to chase, because, yeah, I doubt, especially right away, that PrizePicks is going to be adding to their models an adjustment for updated spawn logic or whatever. I think they'll probably just let it play out and see. Uh, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. What do you think? All right. Let me get the numbers up for you. All right. How about in control? What percentage do you think went over in control?
So I feel like I had them mixed up. So I'm gonna have to go back to what I said before. Kinda. I'm gonna go 58% went over.
Yes, 60% went over.
That was
Very
that was
close.
brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, pull that
Yeah.
out of my ass.
Yeah, I mean, everything we said about hardpoint, the opposite applies to control. I felt like control was exactly what I was expecting. Like, yeah, the rounds felt more kill heavy. The games definitely went skewed longer. I don't know exactly what the league average was last year, or like average number of rounds in a game was compared to just this small sample size. I think they probably weren't what skewed a little longer this weekend. But yeah, I mean, certainly on kills per round basis, I think they were much higher. Um, but yeah, 60% almost exactly went over. Um, Yeah, not surprising. I'm interested to see if that trend continues, if Control continues to play so kill heavy. Yeah, I think Control is one where like I think the meta will evolve a little bit on like how these teams are playing, how favored offense versus defense is, and then also just from watching it, like obviously we saw some big high rise games. I think the map maybe start to become more important. Like yeah, if we are playing Invasion, specifically, I think things are like a little bit play a bit different on Invasion. So with like yeah, but well, at least we saw teams able to win on offense on Invasion when I was under the impression that winning on offense on Invasion was very hard, but teams seem to be able to do it pretty well this weekend for like yeah, a side that was pretty unfavored going in. But yeah, that's interesting. All
Very
right,
interesting.
last one. Search. So there were about 10% of all search totals were pushes this week. And so of the other well, we'll keep it simple. Of the total 100%, how many went over, knowing that 10% of them were pushes?
I'm gonna go with 47%.
41%. So it was about 50% unders and then 40% overs, 10% pushes. So I guess the unders ruled a little bit, just because if you taken all of them, you would have pushed on 10 and then also won on 50% of your unders. But yeah, S&D is an interesting like yeah, we talked a little bit about how S&D might be different just because of the pace of like not playing to get the bomb down or whatever. And so but I don't know, when I watched it I didn't get like an especially strong feeling. So I think I had one interesting thing. So last year, average kills per game in search was about 6.3, and this weekend it was about 6.5. So it was a little higher. Or sorry, yeah, it was a bit higher this weekend, but also PrizePicks average total for search was also up higher, around 6.5. So PrizePicks, I don't know if it was just like an artifact from last year, but yeah, it appeared they were pricing search players a bit higher this time around than last year. Because yeah, like if I were PrizePicks and if I knew nothing, I would look at last year and go, okay, average kills per game was 6.3 last year. Probably mix in a lot more sixes, and there was a lot of like yeah, 6.5 sevens getting put up by PrizePicks, which is interesting. They either knew something or yeah, it just happened to be the way that things went this weekend. But yeah, things yeah, kills seem to be a little easier to get in search right now.
That's 6.5 or six, 6.5. It's such a scary number though. Like even if you don't know anything about it, just like psychologically, if you know Search and Destroy, like how to play it, or even if you don't follow competitive, and you just see 6 kills in Search and Destroy, it's like playing War, right? And you have a 9 or like a 8. You like it's right in the middle. Like there's so many like I don't know, like that's a scary number to me, and I find myself avoiding those so much. And
It's
it
a
was
number that you can get in a win and in a loss too.
yes,
Like you could, if you told me, yeah, oh, this guy had 7 or whatever, I'd be like, well, did they win or did they lose? If you told me a guy had 2, I'm like, oh, okay, then they definitely lost or whatever. And like, yeah, if a guy dropped 14, I hope they won. But like, yeah, I think that's part of it for me is yeah, like, it's very common, but yeah, 6, 7, 8, you can win and lose on those numbers, and like that's where players seem to be. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have a good read on search being any different this year. I think it'll come down more to team matchup. Yeah, like our team, what are the best teams? How many rounds are they favored by? Right now, I wouldn't favor any team on average by more than maybe 1.5 round. Like if I were putting spreads on these search games, I don't think I'd have anyone more than maybe a round and a half favored. So if there can be more than that, then I'm happy to bet the unders on like underdogs if they're like big underdogs. But I don't really see it right now.
yeah, stuff to say. All right, want to move on to this weekend's games, my friend Doug. All right,
Yes.
so we kick things off with Miami and Vegas. Gonna be a phenomenal match if they're anything like they were opening weekend. Miami blew my expectations out of the water. They actually look very, very good out there. So props to all the rookies plus Vickle. And then Vegas also blew my expectations out of the water right there. Nero's an absolute unit out there. I think he had I don't know if it's still standing, but he had a short kill record.
Yeah.
If it didn't stand, if it got beat after, I'm not 100% sure, but he was
I
frying
think
out
it's
the.
still, yeah, I think it still is. But
Okay,
yeah.
okay. What map was that on? Why am I drawing a blank?
Our well, the record they had talked about on the broadcast was kills in the series. He had been the first person at the time to go over 100 total kills in the series, and I don't think anyone on day 3 broke that record. So I think that was what it was. I don't remember. Actually, I think I have the game up, but yeah, I think that was at least that was what the record was total kills in a series was the most anyone had had.
Gotcha. Okay, and as of time of recording, the lines are Miami -120 and Vegas -110. I think it's as fair as you can get without making that a pick 'em. That's a very tough one. I see that one going the distance and being very close. If you do have a book that allows you to take maps, if you would, I would probably look in that direction myself. But unfortunately, I don't have that capability here. But I would look at that going the distance, which means it's going to be a bloodbath. That's what I think on the whole thing. What do you think about the overall matchup?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Like I think Vegas has looked really strong, but I mean we can't overlook the fact that they got reverse swept. I think yeah, their first game against Minnesota, I sat on this podcast last week and was high on Minnesota, and I did they weren't showing me anything this weekend. Or actually no, I was lower on Minnesota and I was higher on Seattle, right? I
Yeah.
hope that's what I said.
Yes.
Revisionist history. I
Yeah.
was really high on Seattle. I knew they were going to be good. No, but yeah, so like I don't know. But I mean sort of you could say the same thing about Miami. We saw them 3-0 London, but that's all we saw them do, and then yeah, London they looked okay. They didn't look that strong. I think it's a bunch of the lower tiered teams playing each other, so it's a little hard to know. Miami could be really good because I mean, what else could they have done against London but 3-0 them? So yeah, like they could be the best team in the league, or they could just be better than London, which isn't saying as much. So I do like where this game is priced. I think it's probably a pretty even matchup. I think the note that I'd made about Nero right now is sitting at 21.5 on map 1 total. I mean, I think the over here is obviously intriguing. He seems to be playing at breakneck speed. And then also like a note that yeah, they have like looking at Bovada betting odds, like they have the hard point as basically a pick 'em. And like we know when games are really close, total kills will go up too. I mean, just more time for players to get kills, and we do see that historically as well. Even in regardless of winning or losing situations, the longer the game goes, the more kills you get. So you might think that because the game's going longer, then the team has to struggle more, but it typically always nets out to more kills. And so like I think 21.5 seems a bit low to me. So I made a note here against London. He had 23 in a game that they won by 80. So like I mean that he was going over by a kill and a half, and the game wasn't particularly close. And he had the most kills on his team. So like to me, yeah, if this game is within 60 points, like win or lose, I think Nero comes out over here. So I think that's an interesting spot. I mean, obviously I just got done saying that 60% of the hard points went under. So, but I do think that like he's probably the only one that I would be really interested in that game because of yeah, I think that maybe that's the pattern from week 1 that I saw is 3 players on a team going way under their total, and then one guy on the team having 20 more kills than his like total. So like I don't know, maybe I like Nero for that spot more than anything. But yeah, I do think I'm expecting I'm hoping for a sub 60 point difference between these teams in map 1, and like that makes Hardpoint very interesting to me.
Yeah, I know I've been talking about betting unders and all that stuff, but I want games to be bangers, right? I don't want them to be blowouts. It's like going to the craps table and playing the do not pass line. Like, I want it to be fun. I don't want it to be boring and just whatever, take my money and run. Like I want players to go off. I want to be able to watch those record games. I want to watch high engagement games. So, with that being said, I did not know about this number until you just brought it up. I didn't have a chance to look. That definitely jumps out to me as well. That's probably something I will dabble in if I can find the right thing to pair it with, especially coming from him who's such a high engagement player and who's playing with a chip on his shoulder and with a lot of confidence right now. I would
Yeah.
say, we're going to see another high engagement game out of him, which, is not far fetched. I mean, he's, like you said, one of the fastest players you've ever seen.
Yeah, I
So
think yeah,
that
it's
jumps out to me.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, you talk about like what to pair it with, and that made me think. I had actually made a note in our document from last week that we were talking through that we ended up not getting to about Vickle, which is interesting. very low engagement player last year, finished with the most engagements on his team in both hard points that they played in week one, and then is also priced on PrizePicks as the highest kill total on the team for map one. It's an interesting spot. Again, yeah, I'm not really saying go one way or the other. It's just, it's one of those spots. I mentioned Kenny earlier, but yeah, it's like, we look at his last 40 games, it's a clear under. We look at his last 2 games, it's a clear over or whatever. Like, he's in an interesting spot where, yeah, like I think it's very easy to justify that the team composition is completely different. He's playing with completely different players in a new game. He's the guy he's the Nero for their team. But on the other hand, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It's the I'm familiar with your game, you can't fool me type meme. Like, it's just yeah, I'm having a hard time. So yeah, like after game one, after the first game with LAT, and I saw Kenny, I would have been thinking the same thing as I'm thinking about Vickle, and then he goes and drops 60 in the next series. So like, I'm keeping my eye on that. But that is like, yeah, when you talk about pairs, Vickle definitely jumps off the page to me, if anything.
I like that. There's a couple, like, I think I ended up having like Journey on one of my picks last week, and I'm sorry, Journey, I took the under on you, and the whole team just came out frying, and I'm like, oh, like I am done, and like I don't know. All in all, I know you like there are the quote unquote middle of the pack teams, but their games have been great. I know it's been 1 week, and it looks like they're going to be competitive, which I love to see. I think this Miami, like I'm so happy with this Miami team that like people had no expectations for, right? And just to see the confidence that they came out with, like, I don't know. I'm happy to see that. Great addition, and I hope all the best for those guys. But I'm very excited for this game. Going to be a good one.
Snap
Uh,
out of it. It's been one game. It's been one game.
I can't snap out of it.
It's too small. We'll
I'm an
see.
emotional guy. Like I get
Yeah.
emotional.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with any of that, though. I mean, you're right. Like, I watched that game, and I was unnecessarily hype for a game between two teams I don't really root for or care about. I was like, when they won, I was like,
Yeah,
hell yeah,
come on
like
now.
that's awesome.
I
Like,
started
let's
speaking.
go.
I started yelling in Spanish after.
Yeah,
I was all excited.
vamos.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
vamos.
it is weird. Yeah, it's definitely, it's good for the scene. Regard, yeah, I'm rooting for them because I'm rooting for the scene, and like, yeah, it's an awesome story, awesome team. Like, I'm just glad they got the shot too, and yeah, they, I mean, 3-0, you literally can't do any better than that. Yeah,
Yeah.
exciting.
Well, speaking of being emotional, I think the books are being emotional with this next game with these lines that we're getting. We have LA Thieves versus the Boston Breach. As of time of recording, it is LA Thieves minus 165 and Boston Breach 124. I think these lines are very lopsided at the moment. I could see them being close, close. I like the value on Boston here, non-biased. I do like the value on them. They went 0-2 to start the season. First game was just a couple mistakes off of beating phase,
That
and
was unbelievably close, those first two maps.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, you can make the argument for Surge. Surge looks great. I'm not taking anything away from them, but it was definitely a winnable game to an extent. But I think that it's too early to count them out. So with that being said, I like the plus 124 on this one. I think there's meat on the bone right there, and I don't think the Thieves are phenomenal. Like I definitely think they're beatable. Not saying they're bad or they played bad, but I definitely think they're a beatable team, especially coming from a lineup like Boston has.
Yeah, it's a very interesting spot. I had tweeted last week about how, like, I thought it was interesting how the books had 100T and Boston, because yeah, they shared an opponent this weekend. They both played Seattle this weekend, which made it interesting, and they were both favored, and they were both like very close to evenly favored against Seattle. And I pointed out because it felt like a contradiction compared to how different the 100T versus phase was compared to like other games. And so it's interesting to see now that after 1 week where both teams lose both games, now suddenly 100T is huge favorites against them. I don't know. The whole thing is just it smells funny to me. I tend to agree. I mean, I think you're a bandwagoner, or not a bandwagoner.
What the
You're a
hell?
loyalist. Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't mean bandwagoner. You're a loyalist for sure. You're a bit biased, but like, yeah, I tend to look at that and go, like, so you're telling me both these teams lost both their games and they're minus 165 favorites against one of the other team, and they both lost to the same team,
Yeah.
and then you got 3-0'd and that made them even bigger favorites somehow? Like, I just, it just, yeah, I don't know. I actually, yeah, on the last week I was very low on 100T. I said I don't think that they're going to be very good. I said that was my hot take, and I mean, obviously they made me look really smart this last weekend. I mean, they were close games, and yeah, I mean, you can't really blame them against FaZe. FaZe looks like they're on a completely different level right now. But like, or at least Simp does, that's for sure. But yeah, I don't. I just find it really hard to get to minus 165 on 100T here. So like, yeah, there's some meat on the Boston bet, but I think also, yeah, like looking at, I mean, we haven't talked a lot about daily fantasy, but yeah, like I think Boston's going to be heavily undervalued in daily fantasy here. I think that like. Looking at these series to be close, I mentioned closer games equals more kills overall. I think there's another angle you could potentially take on this matchup where looking at guys where you think their lines make sense, but now you're take into account that the game might be closer than what the book is suggesting. I think maybe there's some value on the overs there just in general. I'd made one specific note here, just Slasher 21.5 in control. I think that seems a bit high to me. I was on here and like looking at last week, looking at Slasher's stats from the year before, and he was a very low engagement control player in general. Notably in their loss against Seattle, they lost 3-2, so they played all 5 rounds, and he only had 22 in that game. And so to put him at 21.5, and I don't think like you're necessarily guaranteed a round 5 anyway. I think that seems a bit soft to me. That's just like one to look out for. Obviously, I'm saying I think these games are going to be closer, so maybe the overs are going to be stronger. But Austin is a player who, yeah, is typically a low engagement control player in general. Matt probably plays a big role here, but definitely something to watch out for.
Yeah, I agree with that. Gonna be yet again another good game. I think there's a good benefit to having these, once again, air quotes, middle of the pack teams, because as we know in Call of Duty, anything can happen on any given day. Some team can show up, someone cannot show up, and I think we are gearing up for a lot of upsets this year and getting a lot of heads to turn on specific teams they probably, would have looked the other way about. But all in all, looks great. Excited for that game. Shout out Joe Deceives. You want me a shit ton of money this weekend on unders? You are the man.
You didn't have to do them like that.
no, no, Joe, you played great. I just ended up picking the right time. It has nothing to do with that. I picked it blindly. I just completely picked it. And then the last match, which is once again gonna be a banger.
Banger.
We have Optic Texas versus Seattle Surge. As of time of recording, Optic is minus 150 and Seattle is plus 115. I think this should be closer. But with that being said, I'm a fan of Seattle right now, and I know you are too. I think they're playing great. They're clicking. Shout out to Booza. Looks phenomenal out there, fitting in perfectly, and I think we brought that up too. The veteran presence that he has, it's around him. It's incredible, and you're gonna learn like immensely just being around these guys. And it looks like that is already getting past him. He's had a great opening 2 games, and one thing that stands out to me in this, and then we can move on to what sticks out for you, is I don't think we saw Hook pull out an AR once. He was like strictly SMG, which you didn't really see much of,
No,
because
I think we had talked about like that we didn't think that was probably going to be what happened, and yeah.
yeah, and he stayed with it, and it really, in the breach game, for instance, it was a pest. It reminds me of like Zuma back in the day, that really pesty player that just in your face, like on these rad angles, like you're always looking for him, and it opens up lanes for other people, and it takes you out of the zone for a second. I think he played his role extremely well this weekend, and I think that is someone to watch out for, in my opinion. But what do you think about this matchup as a whole?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think it's I mean, yeah, I was a bit low on Hunter T coming in, and so like Seattle, I think yeah, they took care of business this weekend and made everybody who didn't believe in them believe a bit now. But I mean, this is going to be a true test. Like, yeah, I've been very vocal about that there being a top 4 right now, and so yeah, I think this is their first chance at a top 4 team that like is. Yeah, it'd be really telling to see how they do here. I think they definitely can make some noise. I wasn't overly impressed with Optic this weekend. Obviously, coming out 1-1, beating Minnesota, right, on Sunday. Yeah, is nothing that makes me go, oh, okay, they're back or anything. So I think, yeah, I again, I sort of feel the same here, where I'm surprised that Texas is such big favorites, especially given everything that we've seen. And again, I'm coming back to the same well of saying I think these games are going to be closer. I think these games are going to be longer than what the books are maybe suggesting here, which is a great environment for overs. It definitely makes me interested in some control overs, given our conversation about 60% of control overs hitting last week. I like this spot for control overs in general. I think the hard point overs, it's a bit tough. It seems like PrizePicks might be pricing them out a little bit, but yeah, I'm happy with the control overs. Let's see the note that I made here. Oh yeah, I'd already brought this up about Kenny, but yeah, he's at 22.5 in control, but only 20.5 in hard point. I think that just, I don't know, yeah, something I think I've talked about, just like I'm going to point out that I think that those things don't make sense together, and you as the listener can decide which of those two things you think makes less sense and maybe go that way if you have the edge. But like seeing those two together was very surprising to me. I don't think it fits the pattern that the other players on the team have. Yeah, it really depends on, do you take more stock in his long-term historical precedent, which is that he's a pretty low engagement player in general, and then also a very low engagement control player, or do you look at game one where he was basically everywhere on the map? So I don't know. It's that's an interesting spot, not a spot I'll probably be firing at, but it's definitely interesting. Yeah, if you can solve the riddle of which of those two things, 22.5 in control or 20.5 in hard point, is weirder, then I think that's a good spot to target. I think it's soft, I just don't know how. And then I just made a note here. We talk about players with small sample size, like obviously Illy was the talk of the town this weekend. I mean, deservedly so. Guy was absolutely frying. But like, we talk a little bit about like adjusting engagements per minute for kill success. So like if you're winning 90% of your gunfights, it's just going to look like you're going a lot faster, because yeah, it takes a lot less time to get in another engagement when you get a kill than it does if you have to die, spawn, come off spawn, and then get in another one. And so like I think his numbers are a bit inflated, because I mean, yeah, he was putting up just like LeBron numbers but on really really high KDs. So if he's not also getting a 1.5 every game this series, even if he is going fast and putting pressure on, it's just going to be hard to keep those kill numbers up. Like, and so I don't know. I tend to think that every player who's really talented will have a couple of these 1.5 or games or whatever, but it's hard when those get thrown into the average, and then like we average all the games together and we're like, oh, this guy's like really really fast. I just, yeah, I would caution there that maybe we'll see a weekend of adjustment here, where it's like everybody's like, oh my god, Illy, yeah, but yeah, they're going to be disappointed when he drops 22 and he has a 1.1 KD, because like he's going as fast as he can. Like, so that was like, I think that's a trap spot for me this weekend, Illy in general. And I don't know if there's any other players I can think of, but like that general rule I think is a trap spot, where you see a guy drop a 1.5 in two hard points in a series, so he finishes with a series KD of like 1.4 or something, and then you see like, oh, like he had a ton of engagements. It's like, well, yeah, he was winning like 65% of his gunfights. Of course, he's going to be getting a lot of engagements. Like, he was fighting off the entire team. Like, and like, that's never nobody's role in COD is specifically to 1v4 the entire other team at any given time. So like, you can't expect that to happen. Like, I think best case scenario for any team is that no player on your team has to 1v4 at any given time, other than maybe Hydra. Hydra could 1v4 if he wants to. If that's the play call, I think they let him do that. But other than that, maybe not.
It reminds me of methods in Vanguard. When the season first started, he was playing lights out Call of Duty, and to a level that people didn't even know if it was going to be sustainable when it came to the pace he was playing at and the numbers that he was dropping. And then when it comes to, I don't want to say plateau, but correction time, where everyone's learning the game, and that upper hand you initially had, now you are back to everyone's kind of at that level, so it kind of evens out. It might be a situation like that, where after a couple correction games, if you would, or slight decline, which is still going to be a great performance, but compared to these, it'll look like a decline. Maybe that's when we start seeing proper adjustments with someone like Illy's numbers. But it just reminds me of that scenario back a couple of years ago. One thing I also want to point out, and this is going to be the most faded thing you've probably ever heard, but in a world where esports wagering and fantasy is still in its infancy, I wonder if these bookmakers who don't really know a whole lot about Call of Duty or esports in general chase big names and assume because you know the name they are better. So, for instance, like I think two of them on this list is actually pretty comparable. Like LAT in Boston, right? They probably know what 100 Thieves is. They probably don't know what Boston Breach is. Maybe that in
Mhm.
their head, they're like, okay, we know the name, they're better, blah, 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 adjust accordingly. And maybe it's the same way with Optic and Seattle Surge. Maybe
Yeah,
that
it's
plays into it.
certainly
I don't know.
yeah, it's certainly something I've thought there's some evidence for. So I mean, yeah, like if we think about it from the perspective of the bookmaker, I mean, like one general tenet is that they want overall to have equal money on both sides. And this is very general. I would say that's not necessarily true on a game to game basis, but like, yeah, the general tenet is you want to have a line where you can take the money from one side and pay the other side off, and you make the money on the difference between the two, and then vice versa. And they maybe are willing to take a small loss one way versus the other if they feel that their line is sharper than what the people are betting. But then there's this other tenet, which is that like we only want to move the line for sharp bettors as well. And like that doesn't change just because it's Call of Duty and they don't know anything about it. They hopefully can identify who sharper bettors are. And so, yeah, but I do think that from the first tenet, if you have something like Optic versus Boston or something where Optic is a much bigger name, your general Optic fan is not going, I love Optic, but minus 165. I don't know about that. I'm taking Boston here. They're just betting on Optic. They're betting on Optic to win. It reminds me of an amazing TikTok from last year about this guy who like claimed to be a tout, like talking about the Ohio State versus Georgia football game. And he said, I'm taking Georgia at minus 600 and I'm putting like 10 racks on it or something. And like somebody asked me, he's like what number would you go up to before you wouldn't bet on Georgia anymore? He goes, grow up, Georgia's winning this game or something like that. But like that's how Georgia, like that's how you are as a fan. You're like, yeah, it's not about the number. Like I'm gonna bet on Georgia to win. Like
Yeah.
and like yeah, that's what you should grow up, Georgia's gonna win or something. And it's like so like I do think like if you get enough of that money coming in, if the bookmaker, if they're not very smart about the sport, they're gonna go, man, a lot of money on Optic here. Maybe Optic is we priced it softly. We got to move it up. And I will say, like, I do these, like, shout out to my or like a plug for my Twitter. Like, I do these market drive power rankings where I basically take like what the market has the prices for each combination of teams. Like, well, if team A is favored by 6 against team B and team B is favored by 4 against team C, then team A and team C must be 10 points apart. Or like I sort of do that, and like it's just like sort of calculate what the average spread should be for each team. And I have noticed in past years, I do feel like Optic is like they always seem a bit higher in the rankings than like my like if I do my own personal rankings and I compare them against the book, typically they're very even because yeah, like I think the book is probably smarter than me. They get a lot more information. But Optic always rubbed me the wrong way in those. And like I've had people comment on it and go, Optic should not be that high or whatever. And I do think there's like a little bit of an Optic effect. I do wonder if it's the same with 100T. But yeah, so long-winded answer to say I agree with you that there's something there. Sometimes I don't think it's as big as some people might think, but I do think it's hard to deny that like 90% of the bets on any Optic versus X team is going towards Optic. Like
Yeah.
and like as a bookmaker, you just can't risk that Optic goes on just an absolute tear and you end up just having to pay out those guys over and over and over again. So eventually you might try to move the line a little, but at the same time, if they're going to bet on it at any price regardless, then why even bother moving the line? Just yeah. So,
Yeah. It's
but yeah, I know
the
it's a good
whales.
point.
The whales are moving it. The Optic whales. The,
Yeah, these big, deep pocketed Optic fans, they just yeah, you
yeah.
just want to see the world burn.
Awesome. Well, we are shaping up for a phenomenal weekend of Call of Duty. Anything you have more, Dr. Doug, before we drive this puppy home?
No, no, I think yeah, stay on the lookout for good plays this weekend. Obviously, we just talked about Friday, but yeah, I'd say my big warning for this week is we're in this like it's I don't want to say Goldilocks because that makes it sound good, but yeah, like we don't have enough recent data and we're a little too far away for the historical data from last year to matter much anymore. Like, yeah, if I see a guy in a completely different role, I don't care what his historical data on some other team was. And we're in this weird period right now where like, yeah, I don't want to bet on a 3 game sample size, but I also don't want to use the 40 games that were on MW2. So I would just I'm going to be very cautious this weekend. I would urge people to as well. Look for your spots, choose them sparingly. Yeah, and don't take anything like too seriously. It's just so hard to not do that. But I think that's the key. You just can't take one big game as, oh, these guys are the next best thing. Like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think anything could happen. We could see Boston 3-0 100T tomorrow, or I guess, yeah, it'll be tomorrow when you listen to this, and I wouldn't be surprised. Like, that could happen easily. It's the second week of the season. Anything can happen. Like, and so don't count your chickens before they hatch.
Yep. And it's okay to take a weekend off, because you take this weekend off to gather information, you just doubled your bankroll for next week. You're good to go. You can make that money back. You can't lose money if you don't spend it. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? All right. Well, that'll do it for episode 2 of the MW3 season. I'm Chris P. This is Dr. Doug. Bet responsibly, win some cash, huh? We'll see you next week.